Hey, warmer for Levo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peters, and now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got a great podcast for you. A little bit of a two-part conversation today. We quite literally had really no news and notes in college basketball on Saturday. Things have very much waned with regards to the transfer portal. Most of these guys are on teams, so the conference preview podcasts, they are going to be getting started within the next few days. I am in the works on trying to get perhaps 2 conference previews up next week, and the way that I always do these conference previews, I go with the low/mid majors first in alphabetical order, and then the big boys, they will wrap up the offseason. Then we get into the college basketball season with picks and analysis on every single game, every single day, and on days where I don't have a conference preview, we're going to have great guests and great chats, like the one that we're going to have today with Curtis Rogers of 710 Seattle Sports. We are coming off of the NBA draft decision, so we'll be talking about that with them. We'll take a look at the winners and losers of the offseason, a little bit about the Big East, a little bit about the SEC, and additionally, he's out there in Seattle doing great work for 710 Seattle Sports. He's actually the pre- and post-game host for the Mariners, so we're going to chat with him about the Seattle Redhawks. We've talked with him a little this offseason about the teams like Washington State. We'll give Seattle a little bit of love out there in a new look WCC, so we're going to have some fun with him today. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at June_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way, that's fine, an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I do beg with you, I do plead with you, please do send in those Twitter/X questions. It'll help out this offseason and let me know a little bit more about what you want to hear on this podcast throughout the offseason as well. So if you could do me a solid, that would be great there. And what else is great? Getting our friend Curtis Rogers aboard. He's doing such amazing work over at 710 Seattle Sports. Looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. This time of year is an ace when it comes to the baseball front, as I know that he does the pre- and post-game hosting for the Seattle Mariners on the radio side of things. He's dialed in with the Seattle Seahawks as they had their incredible season last year and so much more. Follow him on the old Twitter/X along with Instagram at A Kid From Kent all together. And Curtis, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Greg, always happy to hop on with you. I was able to find some time between 82-0 games online, the sensation that has swept the nation. It's always good to have a game like that, but we're talking college basketball. I'm super excited. And now that we have pretty much figured out where everybody's playing, the portal has slowed down, the NBA draft entries have been announced, we get a much clearer picture of how this season could potentially play out. So I'm super excited to break it all down with you.
Oh, I'm right there with you. And just what did you make out of the NBA draft decisions? Because I feel like there weren't a whole heck of a lot of losers. Maybe Arkansas with Malik Thomas not coming back. And I mean, Alan Graves was not going to go back to Santa Clara either. But other than those two guys, it felt like all the marginal guys, they returned to school.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. One of the biggest names, Andrei Stojakovic, coming back to Illinois after kind of flirting with the NBA. He's always had, obviously the NBA pedigree. The last name kind of speaks for itself. I thought Illinois was a big winner with him coming back to school, potentially looking at a return trip to the Final Four if everything breaks well for them. I also thought Michigan was a bit of a winner as well. They did lose Morez Johnson, but bringing back Elliot Cadeau, that's going to be a huge thing for them. So all in all, yeah, I think it was a smart decision for a lot of these guys kind of on the fringe maybe to go back, because the earning potential in college basketball, especially if you're going to be like a late first rounder, early second rounder, you're looking at a salary that potentially you could make more in NIL if you go that route rather than, going straight to the league and jumping at the first opportunity that pays you. I know I've heard a couple of college football players or former college football players say, hey, I've grown up in the era of NIL. The rookie contract, I'm not going to need to dip into right away because I've got a lot of NIL money left over from my college days. I kind of wonder if that's going to be the same thing for a lot of these guys sort of deciding whether they stay or whether they go pro in the NBA.
Yep, it is going to be interesting to look at. And we saw a pair of guys that were in the NBA draft that decided to hit the transfer portal. And those were seismic moves, in my opinion. Getting Tonde Yusufu on over to St. John's was big. And then Milan Mimicevic heading on over to Kentucky. Felt like those were two teams that had a lot of upside, but they needed that piece. And I feel like both teams got it and then some.
Yeah, and I think the Kentucky one with Mumcelovic is, I think, a huge one in that Mark Pope is entering, year 3 in Lexington, and they needed somebody. They needed a big name in this portal. Yes, Zoom Diallo comes over from Washington. That's a decent sized name, but there's no bigger portal name that was available at the end of the NBA draft entries than Milan Momcilovic from Iowa State. I think Mark Pope did a really good job of securing his services, especially because we know how busy Louisville got in the transfer portal. That's your biggest in-state rival. You can't be losing to them. And I think Mark Pope kind of hears, some of the pressure. That's a tough job to win at. And if you're not, making Final Fours by year 3 in Kentucky, things are going to get really tough for him. So big ups to Kentucky for being able to land that transfer. Also, Yesufu going to St. John's. I really like the Red Storm. I think they could definitely challenge UConn for that Big East title. I think those two programs are going to be right there neck and neck this season. Really like what both those schools have done in the portal. I think the Big East is going to be reaping the rewards of a great St. John's UConn rivalry this year. I'm super excited to watch that one.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I want to go a little bit further on the Big East, because it feels like if you had a reward for the most improved conference in college basketball, I feel like it would go to the Big East. I don't think that they're going to be quite on par with like the SEC, the Big 12, but it feels like a lot of these teams have stepped up and spent. Even a team like a DePaul has decided, hey, we're going to get Magoon Glath. That's something that I never thought that DePaul was going to be doing. Yeah. Marquette decided that they were actually going to hit the transfer portal this offseason, so congratulations to them. I'm not sure you look at things, but I think that the Big East just as a whole is much better than they were just a few months ago.
I think so, and I think it's much better for college basketball when the Big East is among the power conferences. It's always been kind of, the Power Four and one with the Big East. But I really like what we could see from some of these ball clubs. Villanova in their second year under their head coach. I think that's going to be a program definitely worth watching. The Big East is so much better when they are back up top. Now, you mentioned Marquette. I mean, they need a bounce back in the worst way. They were the worst team in the conference if you're just looking at total record last year. I mean, gosh, you look at just how many teams were under 500 in that conference. Unacceptable to see Georgetown as down as they are, Xavier, Providence, Butler. I mean, all of these schools. The Big East really needs to dig themselves out. And, I mean, kudos to UConn for sort of burying the narrative that has followed Gonzaga all these years, where you look at UConn making it to the Final Four again this last year, making it to the national championship game again, I should say, their third national championship game in 4 years. And yet, you look at the totality of the Big East last year, St. John's, UConn, and Villanova did all the lifting. Seton Hall sort of did some lifting. But if it wasn't for those three schools, Greg, I mean, that Big East would have been dreadful. So shout out to St. John's, UConn, and Villanova for doing the heavy lifting this year. But it looks like they're going to get a much more well-rounded effort, which I think is good for everybody in one of the most storied conferences in all of college basketball.
Oh, I'm right there with you, as we've got Curtis Rogers, who does such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports, joining me right here on Cusco Soups. And I do think that it is interesting what we've seen out of the Big East. And out of all the NBA draft decisions, we certainly had a few go the way of the Big East, even though they weren't even involved, with Tonde Yusufu going to St. John's. But outside of St. John's, outside of Kentucky, were there a few teams that you really felt benefited? Because the one that comes to mind for me is Vanderbilt, because we talk about locked and loaded conferences. The SEC is certainly there, and I felt like without Tyler Tanner, Vanderbilt would not stand too much of a chance to be able to compete in that conference. Getting him back, I thought, was massive, even if a lot of people expected it.
Yeah, I thought that was a big one, especially with how much of a load he carried last year. A huge win for Vanderbilt, being able to bring him back. Vanderbilt has shown themselves to be a big player in the NIL world, which is interesting because prior to NIL, Vanderbilt athletics, outside of a couple of guys here or there, has really been kind of an afterthought. But you look at what they're doing in basketball, heck, even in football, they got, I believe, the highest rated quarterback in the recruiting rankings as a freshman, which is unheard of. It's Vanderbilt, for goodness sakes. But good on them for being able to retain the talent and not get picked apart. I'm sure every team, so when they saw Tyler Tanner's name in the portal, they were licking their chops. So great to see him come back and establish himself as a guy to watch for sure. I thought another winner in the portal, let's look at Tennessee. I thought the Volunteers had a really good portal run, especially Juke Harris, getting him from Wake Forest. That's going to be a big addition. I mean, heck, their whole starting five, Greg, pretty much all transfers heading into this season. You've got Miles Rubin, Jalen Harrelson, Terrence Hill, Tyler Lundblade. I think that Tennessee team really cleaned up in the portal. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how Rick Barnes gets those guys to gel together. I also think it's interesting how Tennessee goes from a season where their best player, Nate Ament, was a true freshman, to now going with pretty much all transfers. It's a pretty stark contrast in styles, but look, if there's a guy who can get these guys to work together, I have the utmost confidence of Rick Barnes putting together a pretty solid unit there in Knoxville.
Oh, I'm right there with you, and I want to dive in with Curtis on this on the flip side. We saw Tennessee and Louisville make some great moves in the offseason, but they probably are going to be needing to change around their style a little bit, as they did sign guys that maybe wouldn't fit the way that they played college basketball over the last few seasons. We'll talk about that, and then I do need to get Curtis's thoughts on the Seattle Redhawks and the WCC for this upcoming season. That's coming up on the flip side right here on Cuts Cuts Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Side edge this college basketball season? Well, VSiN experts use CBB Analytics, the most comprehensive college basketball analytics platform in the world. See injury impact, on and off data, clutch time performance metrics, first versus second half splits, and so much more. Utilize the promo code of VSiN, that is VSIN, to get $30 off and find your betting edge over at cbbanalytics.com. That is cbbanalytics, all one word.com. For anyone that is new to VSiN, well, I wish you a friendly hello. This is an attention to anyone that is new to VSiN because you're able to get some free stuff with our daily newsletter. It's a great way to catch up on everything that's happening in the sports betting world. It's delivered straight to your inbox every single morning. VSiN's newsletter offers picks, data, strategies for the day's betting menu, and so much more. Sign up for free today over at VSiN.com/newsletter. That's VSIN.com/newsletter, and start receiving your free newsletter tomorrow morning. That is VSIN.com/newsletter. Stay ahead of the game and bet smarter with VSiN. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Cuts Cuts Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Curtis Rogers, doing such great work over at 710 Seattle Sports, looking at this great game of college basketball all 12 months of the year. Additionally, I know that he's doing absolutely superb work when it comes to his pre- and post-game hosting for the Seattle Mariners this time of year, taking a look at the Seahawks and so much more. Follow him on the old Twitter/X along with Instagram at A Kid From Kent altogether. And Curtis, we left off talking about the SEC. You mentioned Tennessee and the great moves that they made this offseason, and I'm right there with you, but for Tennessee, it's a little bit of a different, shall we say, roster than what we expect to see. Typically, they're built more around big men. Typically, they are a more slow and controlled team. They added a lot of guards and a lot of offense here in the offseason, and Louisville did the exact same thing. They were one of the bigger spenders here in the offseason, too. How about you take a look at teams like Tennessee and Louisville and what they've done here in the offseason, and perhaps maybe they'll need to change their style for this upcoming season?
Absolutely. And the great coaches are the ones that are able to adapt their style to the players that they have rather than sort of fitting a square peg into a round hole with guys, forcing them to fit your system. And I think Rick Barnes is a coach that understands that he can get, the most out of his players by kind of adapting and tweaking to what their strengths are. You mentioned Louisville and what they were able to do in the portal, just really cleaning up and making sure that they have a ton of talent this year. Obviously, with, you look at their potential starting five, I mean, maybe four guys from different schools coming in. I think that's going to be an interesting situation to watch for sure. And then Kentucky, we've talked about, they've got a ton of transfers coming in as well. So I think those schools have definitely shown themselves to be adaptable. And, oh, by the way, Vanderbilt, we talked about them a little bit earlier. Obviously, Tyler Tanner, the big name. A name to watch, though, Ace Glass coming over from Washington State. He was a great scorer for the Cougs this last year. I believe had a 40-point game at one point. So that is definitely a name to watch in the SEC this year. I know a lot of guys have kind of struggled transferring away from the Washington State program in recent years, but I think his scoring ability, you match that with Tyler Tanner, all of a sudden now that's a really good backcourt that the Commodores have.
Yep, I am right there with you. I think that they've done a tremendous job this offseason as well. And I know you talked about Washington State. We've talked a little bit about the Cougars, the Huskies, Gonzaga here in the offseason. I want to bring up this school because there's been a lot of changes out there in the WCC with the new Pac-12, the Mountain West. It's all changed around. How do we look at a Seattle program that I thought had a pretty solid year number one out there in the WCC? As we know now, St. Mary's is going to be the big bad wolf, and I think that there could be a possibility for this team to be able to rise up and be one of those teams that now becomes one of those teams that year in and year out you look at in the WCC, and maybe they're not competing with St. Mary's, but they're competing for perhaps a top 4, top 5 spot.
For sure. I think the WCC in this new era is going to be one that outside of maybe St. Mary's is going to be some of the most wide open we've ever seen, because you can now no longer sort of predict who the top 2 teams are year in and year out. And heck, even St. Mary's losing Randy Bennett to ASU, that's going to be a huge change as well for what that school can do. Do I think they're going to be able to continue the run that they've been on year in and year out? I think for the most part, yes, because they've kind of kept it in family for their latest head coach. But I think right now in the WCC, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for those schools in a similar spot to Seattle U. You look at just all the other teams, I think Grand Canyon, what they're able to do this year. It's going to be a fun season in the WCC. I look at just all the teams that have an opportunity. I still think, yeah, St. Mary's is for sure the most logical pick. But Chris Victor and what he's been able to do at Seattle U, I've seen his name floated for a couple of West Coast job openings in the past. I think it is only a matter of time before he does something pretty groundbreaking at Seattle U, hopefully getting him back to the NCAA tournament, but hopefully not before then. But it sounds like he's going to be a pretty hot commodity over the next couple of years, because I think the Redhawks have a great opportunity. And look, I think what they're able to do, if they can get more games, I think, played at Climate Pledge Arena instead of the on-campus Connolly Center, I think that would be great for the program as well. You always want to put your games in the best venues possible. I hope to see more Seattle U games at what is definitely an NBA caliber arena for sure. This city up here in Seattle, Greg, is starved for a winner, especially at the college basketball level, just at any level, because of how deep the talent is in this city. It has not been the Washington Huskies for quite a while now, so it is definitely for the taking for anybody here in town.
Well, the good news is the Seattle Seahawks. I think that it's fair to say that they were a winner this last season, but that's that. Outside of that, it's been a little bit rough, so hopefully things are able to rise up there. And you mentioned it with Chris Victor. He took over a very tumultuous situation with Jim Hayford leaving on very, very bad terms, and he was able to stabilize things. And things are always stable when you're aboard, Curtis, because you're a wealth of knowledge. You do such great work looking at the sport of college basketball. You're doing an amazing job on the baseball front and so much more. So let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, we're having a lot of fun keeping up with everything college basketball, obviously getting closer and closer to the draft, because the NBA Finals, once those finish up, the NBA draft is almost immediately after that, which I appreciate from the NBA. They keep their season moving in the off season. So love that. We are keeping tabs on every single draft prospect from the Northwest, from all sorts of schools around here. Greg, always happy to hop on with you, talk some college basketball. I look forward to when we do it next.
Yep, absolutely. Now, I will say, I'm not sure if you're keeping tabs on this man in the NBA draft, because for Washington, they had a guy leave that was averaging like 5.5 points per game. The name is right now escaping me, but that was interesting to say the least. That might have been one of the worst stays in the NBA draft that I have seen in quite some time. But one thing that is great, sticking with Curtis Rogers and always having him aboard, he does such amazing work. Bryson Tucker is the name, by the way. I was escaping me. Not sure if you guys are doing a lot of Bryson Tucker news, but I wouldn't expect it, because you guys are doing the good news. You guys are doing the great work over there at 710 Seattle Sports. Always great to be able to get Curtis aboard. Big thanks to him for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you hear podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one or two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it's very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. getting low on the news and notes in college basketball right now. Most of these guys are out of the transfer portal onto teams, so that means conference previews, they're going to be getting started most likely within the next 3 to 4 days. So we're getting really close there. Hopefully I have my first conference preview podcast up by Tuesday or Wednesday, so be on the lookout there. We're going to be going through all these conferences here in the offseason. We're going to be looking at all these news and notes, and it's my job to make this the best college basketball season ever. And once we get back in season, picks and analysis on every single game, every single day. So I appreciate you tuning in today. I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.